Picture this. You're 7 months pregnant, glowing with excitement at your baby shower, surrounded by pastel decorations and the people who are supposed to love you most. Then your own mother stands up, taps her champagne glass, and announces to everyone that you were the family mistake, and now you're just repeating the cycle. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That's exactly what happened to me last Saturday. But what my family didn't know was that my husband wasn't just running late from work. He was wrapping up a classified briefing at the Pentagon. The morning started like any other Saturday in our suburban Virginia home. I was arranging pink and white balloons in the living room, my swollen belly making every movement feel like a choreographed dance. Marcus had left early for what he called weekend obligations, a phrase I'd grown accustomed to over our 3 years of marriage. His job at the Department of Justice kept him busy, though I never pressed for details about his exact role. My sister Bethany arrived first, her arms full of gift bags and that familiar look of barely contained judgment. She'd been the golden child our entire lives. Stanford MBA, successful marketing career, married to a surgeon. I was the art teacher who'd settled down in a small town. "Sarah, honey, you sure this place is big enough for 30 people?" she asked, scanning our modest living room. "I mean, it's cozy, but..." I forced a smile. "It'll be perfect. Mom and Dad should be here soon." The next hour brought a steady stream of neighbors, old college friends, and Marcus's colleagues' wives. I'd met most of them only briefly at office parties, but they were kind enough to come celebrate our first child. The house filled with laughter and the rustle of gift wrap, and for a moment, I felt genuinely happy. Then my parents arrived. Dad carried himself with that same military posture he'd maintained 20 years after retiring from the Army. Mom swept in wearing her pearls, and that expression she reserved for events she considered beneath her standards. They'd made their disappointment in my life choices clear from the day I'd announced my engagement to Marcus, a man they'd met exactly twice and deemed mysterious and probably not ambitious enough. "Well, would you look at this little gathering?" Mom said, her voice carrying that saccharine tone that always preceded her most cutting remarks. "How intimate." The shower proceeded normally at first. Games were played, gifts were opened, and I started to relax. Maybe today would be different. Maybe becoming a grandmother would soften Mom's edges. I should have known better. It happened during the toast. I was sitting in the designated mommy chair, decorated with ribbons, surrounded by opened gifts, and feeling genuinely grateful for the outpouring of support. Bethany had just finished a sweet speech about becoming an aunt, and I was wiping away happy tears when Mom stood up. She cleared her throat and raised her champagne flute. The room fell quiet, everyone expecting warm words from the grandmother-to-be. "I'd like to say something about my daughter Sarah," she began, and my heart swelled with hope. "You know, when I was Sarah's age, I had everything planned out perfectly. Career, marriage, children, all timed precisely, but life has a way of throwing us curveballs." The room stayed attentive, but I felt the first flutter of unease. "Sarah here was what you might call our happy little accident. 28 years ago, her father and I thought we were done having children. Bethany was 7, perfect in every way, and we had our lives exactly where we wanted them." Her smile never wavered, but her words cut like precision instruments. But surprise! Along came Sarah. And now, well, it seems like she's determined to repeat the pattern. Unplanned pregnancy, uncertain future, making the same impulsive choices that led to her existence in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes on me, some shocked, others embarrassed for witnessing such a moment. My hands instinctively moved to my belly as if I could protect my unborn daughter from the poison in my mother's words. "Mom," Bethany whispered, but it was too late. "Oh, don't look so serious, everyone," Mom continued with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I'm just being honest. Sarah's always been our little mistake, and now she gets to experience the joy of having her own. At least this time it's within marriage, though I do worry about the timing. 7 months along and only now having a proper baby shower? And where is this mysterious husband of hers? Always working, apparently." Reminds me of someone else who promised the world and delivered excuses. I couldn't breathe. The carefully arranged world of my baby shower, the decorations I'd hung with such care, the cake I'd ordered weeks in advance, the joy I'd felt just moments before, all of it crumbled around me. Some guests stared at their hands, others whispered among themselves. My college roommate Jessica looked like she wanted to punch something. "That's enough," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just preparing you for reality. Motherhood isn't all sunshine and baby giggles. Especially when you're starting from behind, like we did with you. But look how you turned out. Mostly functional, gainfully employed, and you managed to find someone willing to marry you despite everything. So there's hope for this little one, too." I stood up slowly, my pregnant body feeling heavier than it ever had. "You need to leave." "Sarah, don't be dramatic." Get out." The words exploded from me with a force I didn't know I possessed. "All of you who think this is entertaining, get out of my house." But Mom wasn't finished. She set down her champagne and crossed her arms. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Emotional outbursts. No control. This is why I worry about you as a mother, Sarah. You can't handle a little honest feedback without falling apart. How are you going to handle a crying baby at 3 a.m? How are you going to manage when your husband decides his career is more important than diaper duty?" "My husband," I said through gritted teeth, "is a good man who works hard for his family." "Your husband," she shot back, "is never here. Just like your father wasn't there for you kids when his important army business took priority over soccer games and school plays. History repeats itself, Sarah. That's what mistakes do. They compound." The front door opened at that exact moment, and Marcus walked in. But he wasn't alone. 3 men in dark suits followed him through the doorway, each with the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention. Marcus himself looked different. More authoritative somehow. His weekend casual clothes replaced by a crisp navy suit I'd never seen before. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying an edge I'd rarely heard. His eyes swept the room, taking in the tension. My tears, the scattered remnants of what should have been a celebration. I hope I didn't miss anything important. The men behind him remained silent, but their very presence seemed to shift the energy in the room. Mom's mouth had fallen slightly open, and Dad, a career military man who could read rank and authority from a mile away, had gone very, very still. "Marcus," I said, relief flooding through me despite the chaos. "These are my parents, Robert and Patricia Henderson. Mom, Dad, this is my husband." Quote. Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand to my father first. "Colonel Henderson, I presume? I've heard a great deal about your service record." Marcus Chen, Deputy Director of the FBI. The words hit the room like a physical force. I felt my knees go weak. Deputy Director? Marcus had told me he worked in federal law enforcement, but I'd assumed he was an analyst or investigator. The FBI's Deputy Director was the second highest position in the entire bureau. Dad's handshake lasted longer than usual, his military bearing automatically adjusting to acknowledge superior civilian authority. Mom looked like she'd been struck by lightning. "I apologize for the security detail," Marcus continued smoothly, gesturing to the 3 men who'd entered with him. "Occupational hazard. I hope you don't mind if they wait outside." The men nodded and filed back through the front door with military precision. The remaining guests sat in stunned silence, suddenly understanding why Marcus was always, quote, working late, and why we lived in a house with security cameras that I'd assumed were just neighborhood paranoia. "Now then," Marcus said, his attention turning to the room at large, "I believe I walked in on some kind of family discussion?" Mom's face cycled through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly gray. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air, clearly trying to process how her art teacher daughter had somehow married one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country. "Deputy Director?" Dad finally managed, his military training kicking in as he straightened his posture even further. "Sir, I had no idea Sarah was married to someone of your caliber." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah's told me so much about her family." In fact, just this morning I was reviewing some interesting background information. He pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. You'd be amazed what crosses my desk on a Saturday morning. Security clearance reviews, personnel files, interesting financial discrepancies that require federal attention. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several guests began gathering their purses, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. Marcus, I whispered, but he held up a gentle hand. Please, sweetheart, let me properly introduce myself to your parents. After all, they've been so vocal about their concerns regarding our marriage. His gaze fixed on Mom with laser precision. Mrs. Henderson, you mentioned being worried about Sarah's choice in husband. I'm curious, what specifically concerns you about her judgment? Mom's champagne flute trembled in her hand. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. And you assumed I was inadequate because I don't discuss my work at dinner parties, Marcus finished smoothly. Understandable. Operational security tends to make social situations complicated. For instance, when Sarah and I got married, I couldn't explain why the guest list required advanced security screening, or why certain family members had to undergo background checks. Bethany's eyes widened. Background checks? Standard procedure when you marry into certain levels of government service. Nothing personal, though I have to say, some of the financial irregularities that surfaced during routine screening were fascinating. Marcus's tone remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. Tax discrepancies, unreported income from consulting work, some questionable charitable deductions. The kind of thing that usually gets flagged for audit. Dad's military composure cracked slightly. Now see here. Oh, I'm not making accusations, Colonel. Just sharing the kinds of interesting details that come across my desk. Did you know that when someone marries a federal executive, their extended family members automatically get placed on watch lists? Not malicious surveillance, just awareness. We like to know who has access to our people. The remaining guests were now actively fleeing. Jessica squeezed my shoulder as she passed, whispering that she'd call later. Within minutes, the living room had cleared, except for my immediate family and Marcus. Mom finally found her voice again. This is ridiculous. We're Sarah's parents. We have every right to express concerns about calling your pregnant daughter a mistake in front of 30 people? Marcus's facade of politeness evaporated. About suggesting she's doomed to repeat some imaginary cycle of failure? About humiliating her at what should be one of the happiest moments of her life? You don't understand our family dynamics, Mom said, attempting to regain her authority. Sarah has always been sensitive. We were just trying to prepare her for the realities of... The realities of what, exactly? Marcus stepped closer, and I saw something in his demeanor that must have made criminals confess in interrogation rooms. Help me understand your parenting philosophy, Mrs. Henderson. Do you believe that publicly shaming your children produces better outcomes? Is that a technique you learned somewhere, or did you develop it independently? Now you listen here, Dad interjected, his face reddening. We don't need some government bureaucrat lecturing us about how to handle our own daughter. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying my father with the kind of attention usually reserved for specimens under a microscope. Government bureaucrat, he repeated slowly. That's an interesting characterization. Most people would say that the deputy director of the FBI is a law enforcement executive responsible for national security operations. But I suppose perspective matters. He pulled out his phone again. Should I have my staff send you an organizational chart? Help clarify where exactly I fit in the federal hierarchy? Dad's military bearing faltered completely. As a career Army officer, he understood chain of command better than anyone. The deputy director of the FBI reported directly to the director, who reported to the attorney general, who reported to the president. My husband was 3 steps away from the Oval Office. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Dad said quickly. Has there? Marcus asked. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you both have some very strong opinions about your daughter's worth, her decision-making capabilities, and her choice in spouse. I'm curious whether those opinions might change based on new information. Mom was clutching her purse like a life preserver. We didn't know. Didn't know what? That Sarah deserved respect regardless of who she married? That calling someone a mistake is devastating, whether their husband works at a gas station or runs counterterrorism operations. Marcus's voice remained calm, but the air around him practically crackled with contained authority. Or did you think there would be no consequences for treating my wife like garbage because you assumed I was nobody important? Bethany, who'd been silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke up. Sarah, why didn't you tell us Marcus was... Because it doesn't matter, I said, finding my voice for the first time since Marcus had arrived. It shouldn't matter what my husband does for a living. You should have treated me with respect because I'm your daughter, and your sister. Not because you were afraid of his job title. Exactly, Marcus said, his hand finding mine. Though I have to admit, Sarah, there's something poetic about the timing. I spent this morning in briefings about protecting American families from threats, and I came home to find our own family under attack from within. Mom made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. We weren't attacking anyone, we were just... Just what? I demanded. Just trying to ruin the happiest day I've had in months? Just making sure everyone knows how ashamed you are of me? Just guaranteeing that every time I look at photos from today, I'll remember being called a mistake while carrying your granddaughter. The word granddaughter hit Mom like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her performance that she'd forgotten there was an innocent child involved in her cruelty. Sarah, I never meant... Yes, you did. The clarity of it was startling. You meant every word. You've been waiting years to say it, and today felt like the perfect opportunity because you thought I was safe to humiliate. You thought my husband was somebody who wouldn't challenge you. Marcus squeezed my hand. For the record, Mrs. Henderson, your daughter is the most extraordinary person I've ever met. She teaches high school students who've been written off by everyone else and helps them find their artistic voice. She volunteers at the women's shelter every weekend, creating art therapy programs for trauma survivors. She's kind, brilliant, and stronger than anyone in this room. Including, he continued, his gaze shifting between my parents, stronger than people who need to tear down their own children to feel powerful. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Deputy Director Chen, perhaps we could start over. Clearly there have been some miscommunications. Have you? Marcus asked. Because I heard your wife quite clearly. She called Sarah a mistake, suggested she was doomed to repeat cycles of failure, and questioned my commitment to our family. Which part was miscommunication? The front door opened again, and one of Marcus's security details stepped inside. Sir, you have a call from the Attorney General, priority level 7. Marcus nodded. 2 minutes. The man disappeared back outside. Priority 7? Dad asked weakly. National security matters, Marcus explained casually. The kind of thing that requires immediate attention from the Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You know, the job your wife just suggested makes me an absent husband and inadequate father. Quote, he turned to me, his expression softening completely. Sarah, I have to take this call, but we're not done here. Your parents owe you an apology, and frankly, they owe our daughter one too. Our daughter? Mom asked faintly. The granddaughter you just called a mistake by extension, Marcus said coldly. The child who will grow up knowing that her maternal grandparents publicly humiliated her mother while she was still in the womb. He kissed my forehead gently. I'll be right back. And when I return, we're going to have a very different conversation about respect, family, and the consequences of cruelty. As Marcus stepped outside to take his call, the room fell into the kind of silence usually reserved for churches and crime scenes. Mom sank into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. Dad stood at attention, his military mind processing the chain of command implications of insulting the deputy director's wife. And me? I sat in my ribbon-decorated chair, surrounded by the ruins of my baby shower, finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. But for the first time in my life, I realized I might not want to rebuild them anyway. The 15 minutes Marcus spent outside on his call felt like hours. Mom had moved to the couch, staring at her hands like they held answers to questions she'd never thought to ask. Dad paced near the window, occasionally peering through the curtains at the black SUVs now parked in our driveway. Sarah, Bethany whispered, settling beside me, why didn't you ever tell us what Marcus really does? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if you'd known 3 years ago? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The silence stretched until Mom finally spoke. I don't understand how this happened. How did you meet someone like that? How did we not know? You never asked, I said simply. In 3 years of marriage, you never once asked Marcus about his work beyond making jokes about government paychecks. You decided he wasn't worth knowing the moment you met him. That's not fair, Dad protested. He was always so secretive. He has security clearances that require discretion. There's a difference. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, the baby choosing this moment to press against my ribs. Do you want to know how we met? Quote, they nodded eagerly, desperate for anything that might help them understand their massive miscalculation. I was teaching a summer art class at the community center downtown. Kids from low-income families, mostly. One afternoon, this man in a suit shows up asking about enrollment for his nephew. Said the boy's parents had died in a car accident, and he was trying to find positive activities. I smiled at the memory. Marcus spent an hour watching Kevin paint, this angry 14-year-old who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. When Kevin finally started talking about his artwork, Marcus just listened. No judgment, no rushing, just complete attention. That's when I knew he was different. His nephew? Mom asked. Kevin Martinez. His father was an FBI agent killed in the line of duty. Marcus had been guardian to 3 kids under 17, working 60-hour weeks and still showing up to every art class, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. I touched my belly. He proposed to me in that same community center classroom, surrounded by finger paintings and crayon drawings, because he said that's where he'd learned what family really meant. Dad stopped pacing. As a military man who'd missed countless family events for duty, he understood the weight of what I'd just described. We had no idea, he said quietly. Because you never wanted to know. You met him twice. Once at our engagement dinner, where you spent the whole time comparing him to Bethany's surgeon husband, and once at the wedding where you complained about the security protocols. The anger I'd been suppressing for years finally found its voice. You decided he wasn't good enough based on the fact that he couldn't talk about classified operations over cocktails. Mom's composure finally cracked completely. Sarah, honey, if you'd known what? That he was important enough to matter? That's the problem, Mom. You've never thought I was important enough to matter. The front door opened, and Marcus returned, but his demeanor had shifted again. The controlled authority from earlier was gone, replaced by something harder and more focused. He moved like a man who'd just received information that changed everything. I need to speak with you privately, he said to my parents, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Marcus, what's wrong? I asked. The call I just took involved a federal investigation that's been ongoing for 8 months. It seems some very interesting connections have surfaced. He looked directly at Dad. Colonel Henderson, are you familiar with defense contractor TechFlow Solutions? Dad's face went white. That was years ago. I consulted for them after my retirement. Perfectly legal. Legal, yes. Fully disclosed on tax returns? That's where things get complicated. Marcus pulled out a tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be official documents. See, when someone marries into federal executive positions, routine background checks extend to immediate family members. Usually it's just paperwork. But sometimes we find patterns. What kind of patterns? Bethany asked, though her voice suggested she didn't really want to know. TechFlow Solutions has been under investigation for bid manipulation on Department of Defense contracts. Specifically, using retired military personnel to influence procurement decisions through undisclosed relationships. Marcus's voice carried the clinical precision of someone reading evidence into a court record. Colonel Henderson's consulting fees between 2019 and 2023 totaled $340,000. Reported income for those same years? $89,000. Mom made a strangled sound. Robert, what is he talking about? It's not what it sounds like, Dad said desperately. The paperwork was complex. There were multiple payment schedules. There were deliberate omissions designed to hide income from federal taxation, Marcus corrected, which becomes a federal crime when it exceeds certain thresholds. Which it did, substantially. The room spun around me. My parents, the people who'd just spent 20 minutes detailing my inadequacies and poor judgment, were potentially facing federal charges for tax evasion and corruption. But that's not the fascinating part, Marcus continued, settling into the chair across from them like a professor beginning a lecture. The fascinating part is the timing. TechFlow's CEO was arrested this morning. He's been talking to federal prosecutors for the past 6 hours, providing detailed records of all consultant payments and the services they were meant to secure. Dad collapsed into a chair. Sarah, you have to understand, after retirement, the pension wasn't enough, and TechFlow was offering legitimate consulting work. Legitimate consulting work that you forgot to report to the IRS for 4 consecutive years, Marcus said, while simultaneously claiming exemptions for charitable donations that couldn't be verified and business expenses that didn't exist. How much trouble are we talking about? Bethany asked, her marketing executive brain immediately calculating damage control scenarios. Marcus consulted his tablet again. Criminal tax evasion, potential conspiracy charges related to the defense contract fraud, penalties, and interest on unreported income. Conservative estimate? We're looking at federal prison time ranging from 18 months to 7 years, depending on cooperation levels and plea agreements. Mom was crying now, not the manipulative tears she'd weaponized throughout my childhood, but the genuine terror of someone whose world was collapsing in real time. However, Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly, there are always options in federal cases. Cooperation agreements, restitution programs, alternative sentencing structures for first-time offenders over 65. What kind of cooperation? Dad asked desperately. Full financial disclosure, testimony regarding TechFlow's operations, complete cooperation with ongoing investigations. Plus, naturally, making amends for any personal situations that might reflect poorly on a federal executive's family. The meaning was crystal clear. Fix what you broke here, or face the full weight of federal prosecution. Mom looked up at me through her tears. Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never should have. Stop, I said firmly. Don't apologize because you're scared of going to prison. Don't apologize because you finally understand that my husband can destroy your life with a phone call. Apologize because you realize that what you did was wrong. I do realize that, she whispered. I've been realizing it for years, but I didn't know how to. I was jealous, Sarah. Jealous that you seemed so happy when I'd spent 30 years being miserable. Jealous that you found someone who clearly adores you when your father barely notices I exist. I wanted to tear you down because seeing you succeed made my failures impossible to ignore. The honesty was startling. In 35 years, I'd never heard Mom admit to anything resembling personal responsibility or emotional vulnerability. Marcus watched this exchange with professional interest, then checked his phone. I need to make some calls. This investigation is moving faster than expected, and there are decisions to be made about how to proceed. Quote. He paused at my chair, leaning down to speak quietly in my ear. This is your choice, Sarah. I can make this go away completely, or I can let justice take its course. But understand, once I make those calls, the decision is final. I looked at my parents, both of them, broken and terrified, finally understanding the consequences of their cruelty. Then I looked at my husband, the man who'd just revealed he had the power to destroy my family or save them, and was putting that choice entirely in my hands. Give me 5 minutes, I said. Marcus nodded and stepped onto the patio, leaving me alone with the people who'd shaped my life through decades of casual cruelty, now desperate for mercy they'd never shown me. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, as if reminding me that whatever I decided would affect more than just the people in this room. Outside, I could see Marcus on his phone, probably speaking to prosecutors and investigators who were waiting for his guidance on how to proceed with a case that could send my parents to federal prison. In 5 minutes, I had to decide whether to forgive 35 years of damage or let my family face the consequences of their choices. The clock on the mantel ticked toward what felt like the most important decision of my life. Those 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. I sat in my ribbon-decorated chair, surrounded by unopened baby gifts and the shattered remains of what was supposed to be a celebration, weighing 35 years of hurt against an opportunity for revenge I'd never dreamed possible. Bethany broke the silence first. "Sarah, I know I don't have the right to ask, but—" "You're right," I said quietly. "You don't have the right to ask." Dad was staring at the floor, his military bearing completely gone. "I never meant for any of this to happen. The tech flow thing, it started small. Just some advice here and there, and then the money got bigger, and it seemed harmless." "Harmless?" I turned to face him fully. "You spent 4 years cheating on your taxes, while lecturing me about responsibility and poor decisions. You took illegal money while calling my husband inadequate because you assumed he didn't make enough." "Sarah, please," Mom whispered. "We know we've been terrible parents. We know we've hurt you. But prison, at our age." The baby kicked again, harder this time, and suddenly I thought about the nursery Marcus and I had been preparing. Soft yellow walls, because we wanted to be surprised about the gender. A rocking chair by the window where I'd planned to feed her and sing lullabies. Picture books already lined up on shelves, waiting for tiny hands to reach for them. I thought about the kind of grandmother I wanted my daughter to have. Did I want her to grow up visiting Grandma and Grandpa in federal prison? Did I want her first words to be spoken through reinforced glass during visiting hours? But then I thought about something else. The years of comments about my weight, my career choices, my friends, the way Mom had forgotten to invite me to family gatherings. The Christmas when she'd given Bethany a diamond necklace and handed me a gift card to Target. The constant, dripping cruelty that had shaped every interaction we'd ever had. Marcus appeared in the patio doorway, his phone still pressed to his ear. He caught my eye and held up 2 fingers. 2 more minutes. "Sarah," Bethany said suddenly, "do you remember when you were 12 and you painted that portrait of Mom for Mother's Day?" I remembered. I'd worked on it for weeks, mixing colors until I got her skin tone exactly right, spending hours on the details of her earrings. I'd been so proud of it. "She threw it away," I said flatly. "I found it in the garbage the next morning." "I know," Bethany whispered. "I saved it. I've had it in my closet for 23 years because even then I knew she was wrong. It was beautiful, Sarah. You were 12 years old, and you painted something that belonged in a gallery." Mom's face crumpled. I was having such a hard time that year. Your father was deployed. I was alone with 2 kids, and seeing myself through your eyes, so beautiful, so perfect, it made me feel worse about myself. I couldn't stand to look at it. So you destroyed it instead of getting help, instead of talking to someone. Instead of realizing that your 12-year-old daughter thought you were beautiful enough to spend weeks painting. Marcus ended his call and stepped back inside. His expression was unreadable, but I caught the slight nod he gave me. The decision point had arrived. "The Attorney General wants to move forward with charges," he announced. "The tech flow case is high profile, and they're looking to make examples of everyone involved. However, there are still some prosecutorial discretion options available for the next," he checked his watch, 7 minutes. Dad's hands were shaking. "What would we need to do?" Quote, "Full financial disclosure, complete cooperation with the investigation, immediate payment of all back taxes plus penalties and interest, community service, and 5 years of federal probation with monthly check-ins." "And if we don't agree?" Mom asked. "Arrest warrants will be issued within the hour. Federal marshals will execute them tomorrow morning. Given the flight risk assessment and the amounts involved, bail will likely be set at $500,000 each." The number hit them like a physical blow. Between them, they might have had $50,000 in liquid assets. "Sarah," Dad said, his voice breaking, "I know we don't deserve your help. I know we've been terrible to you. But please." "Stop," I held up my hand. "Don't beg, don't grovel, don't make this about what you deserve." I struggled to my feet, my pregnant body making every movement deliberate and difficult. Walking to the window, I looked out at our quiet suburban street. Normal Saturday afternoon. Kids riding bikes, neighbors washing cars. None of them knew that a federal investigation was being decided in the house with the baby shower decorations. "Marcus," I said without turning around, If they take the cooperation deal, what happens to their lives? Significant financial hardship from the back taxes and penalties. Dad's military pension gets garnished. They'll probably have to sell the house, downsize significantly. The probation restrictions mean no travel, regular drug testing, employment limitations. But they stay out of prison. And the alternative? 18 months to 7 years federal time, depending on how much the prosecutors want to make this case about defense contractor corruption versus simple tax evasion. Either way, they lose everything. House, savings, pensions, health insurance. They come out of prison in their 70s with nothing. I closed my eyes and felt the baby settle into a quieter position, as if she too was waiting for this decision. When I turned back to face my parents, I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine fear mixed with what might have been actual remorse. "You want to know what I think?" I said finally. "I think you're both cowards who spent 35 years tearing me down because it was easier than fixing your own problems. I think you called me a mistake today because you've always resented that I exist. And I think if Marcus worked at a hardware store instead of the FBI, you'd still be sitting here making excuses for why your behavior was justified." They said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Every word was true. "But," I continued, placing my hand on my belly, "I also think my daughter deserves the chance to meet her grandparents, even terrible ones. Even ones who spent decades being cruel to her mother. Because maybe, you can learn to be better people. Maybe shame and consequences can teach you things that decency never did." I walked over to Marcus and took his hand. "Make the call. Offer them the cooperation deal, but with additional conditions." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of conditions?" "They attend family therapy, all of us, once a week for 2 years. With a therapist who specializes in generational trauma and emotional abuse. If they miss a session or refuse to participate meaningfully, the original charges get filed." "Sarah," Mom gasped, That's generous," I said firmly. "That's me giving you a chance to learn how to treat your daughter and granddaughter with respect. That's me risking 2 years of my life trying to salvage something from this family that might be worth saving." Marcus squeezed my hand. "And if they can't or won't change? Then in 2 years we'll know we tried everything. And our daughter will grow up understanding that some people can't be helped. But that doesn't mean you stop trying to be better than they are." Dad was crying now. Quiet, broken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his chest. "Sarah, I don't know how to be a better father. I don't know how to undo 35 years of—" "Then learn," I said simply. "You're a smart man who managed a successful military career and figured out how to steal money from the government for 4 years without getting caught. If you can do those things, you can learn how to treat your family with basic human decency." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'll need 15 minutes to set up the cooperation agreement with the additional therapy requirements. The Attorney General will need to sign off on the modified terms." As he stepped away to make the calls that would determine my parents' future, I looked around the room one more time. The baby shower decorations seemed absurd now, cheerful pink and white streamers hanging over a scene that had fundamentally changed all of our lives. "Sarah," Bethany said quietly, "thank you, for all of us." Quote, "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "Thank me in 2 years if Mom and Dad actually show up and do the work. Thank me when they learn your granddaughter's name without someone having to remind them 3 times. Thank me when they attend a school play without commenting on how other parents are dressed." I settled back into my chair, exhausted from carrying the weight of everyone else's choices. Outside, Marcus was pacing the patio while talking to what sounded like very important people about very serious legal matters. In a few hours, my parents would sign documents that would change their lives forever. They'd agree to financial ruin, federal supervision, and 2 years of forced introspection about their failures as human beings. But they'd also get the chance to meet their granddaughter. They'd get the opportunity to learn what love looked like when it wasn't conditional on performance or status or meeting impossible expectations. Whether they took that opportunity or wasted it was up to them. For the first time in my life, the burden of fixing my family's dysfunction wasn't on my shoulders. And that, I realized as my daughter kicked gently against my ribs, might be the greatest gift I could give either of us. 3 months later, I was standing in the nursery at 2 a.m., gently bouncing my daughter Emma while she fought sleep with the determination of someone who'd inherited her father's stubborn streak. The soft yellow walls we'd painted looked different in the glow of the nightlight, warmer somehow, like they were wrapping us both in safety. The therapy sessions had been brutal. Dr. Patricia Reeves specialized in what she called intergenerational trauma patterns, which was a clinical way of saying she helped families figure out why they kept hurting each other across decades. Her office was deliberately neutral: beige walls, comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, tissues strategically placed within reach of every seat. The first session had been a disaster. Mom spent 45 minutes explaining why her behavior at the baby shower was justified given her quote, stressful circumstances. Dad sat in military straight posture, treating therapy like a briefing he needed to endure rather than participate in. Bethany tried to play mediator, suggesting we all just move forward without dwelling on the past. Dr. Reeves had listened to it all with the patience of someone who'd heard every family dysfunction story imaginable, then asked a single question that shattered their defenses. "Mrs. Henderson, can you tell me about the last time you told Sarah you were proud of her?" The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 minutes. Mom searched her memory desperately, cycling through graduations, achievements, milestones. Finally, she whispered, "I don't think I ever have." "Why do you think that is?" "Because," Mom's voice cracked, "because being proud of Sarah meant admitting that she succeeded despite me, not because of me. And I couldn't handle that level of failure." Emma finally surrendered to sleep, her tiny fist uncurling against my chest. I settled into the rocking chair Marcus had assembled, with the focused intensity he usually reserved for federal investigations, complete with color-coded instruction manual and backup screws, just in case. The financial consequences of the cooperation deal had been severe. My parents lost their house within 6 weeks, moving into a cramped apartment across town. Dad's pension was garnished so heavily that he took a job at Home Depot, his 70-year-old hands learning to operate a cash register under the patient guidance of teenage supervisors. Mom started cleaning houses, work she'd once considered beneath her, and discovered that physical labor was oddly therapeutic. But something unexpected happened during those sessions. Stripped of their financial security and social status, my parents began to change in ways I'd never thought possible. The breakthrough came during session number 12. Dr. Reeves had been exploring what she called family mythology, the stories we tell ourselves about why things are the way they are. "Sarah," she'd said, "your parents have described you as difficult and overly sensitive for most of your life. Can you help me understand what those words actually mean?" I'd thought about it carefully. I think difficult means I asked questions they couldn't answer, like why they treated me differently than Bethany, or why Dad missed every school event but never missed a golf tournament. And I think overly sensitive means I cried when they hurt my feelings, instead of pretending everything was fine. So Sarah's sensitivity was actually emotional honesty, Dr. Reeves observed, and her difficulty was actually critical thinking. Dad had shifted uncomfortably. We were trying to prepare her for the real world. Life isn't fair, and we thought if we toughened her up. "Colonel Henderson, you were a military officer for 25 years. In your experience, did breaking down recruits' self-esteem make them better soldiers, or did building up their confidence and skills make them better soldiers?" The question hit him like a physical blow. In his professional life, Dad had been a leader who inspired loyalty and excellence. In his personal life, he'd been a tyrant who demanded compliance through fear. Building them up, he'd admitted quietly, always building them up. Marcus appeared in the nursery doorway, still in his pajamas but clearly alert. His security detail had gotten used to his middle-of-the-night parenting shifts, though I suspected they drew straws to see who had to stay awake monitoring a federal executive changing diapers. "How's our girl?" he whispered, settling on the floor beside my chair. "Fighting sleep like it's a federal crime," I murmured. "How was your day?" 3 congressional briefings, a meeting with Homeland Security, and a conference call with field offices in 12 states. But none of it was as challenging as getting her to eat strained peas yesterday. Emma stirred at the sound of his voice, her eyes opening to focus on his face with the kind of attention she usually reserved for ceiling fans and colorful toys. "Your grandparents are coming to visit tomorrow," I told her softly. "They're very different people than they were when you were born." It was true. The combination of financial consequences, federal probation, and intensive therapy had fundamentally altered my parents' worldview. Mom had developed what Dr. Reeves called appropriate humility, the ability to admit mistakes without deflecting blame. Dad had learned to listen without immediately offering solutions or judgments. Last week, Mom had brought Emma a gift she'd made herself, a photo album filled with pictures of me as a child, each one accompanied by a handwritten note about what she should have said at the time, instead of what she actually said. Age 8, school art show. What I said: "It's nice, honey, but maybe try to stay inside the lines next time." What I should have said: "This is incredible. You have real talent, and I'm so proud of your creativity." Age 16, first heartbreak. What I said: "I told you that boy was trouble. Maybe, next time you'll listen to me." What I should have said: "I'm sorry you're hurting. Heartbreak is awful, and you deserve someone who sees how wonderful you are." The album had 43 entries. 43 missed opportunities to build up instead of tear down. 43 moments when she could have chosen love over control. Dad's transformation had been different, but equally profound. He'd started volunteering at the Veterans Center, using his leadership skills to help younger veterans navigate the transition to civilian life. For the first time in his life, he was applying his military training to nurture rather than dominate. "Sarah," he'd said during our last session, "I spent your entire childhood trying to make you tough enough to survive in a harsh world. I never realized I was creating the harsh world you needed to survive." Dr. Reeves nodded approvingly. "Colonel Henderson, that's what we call a breakthrough insight. Can you take that awareness and apply it to your role as Emma's grandfather?" "I want to be the kind of grandfather who makes her feel safe to be herself," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want her to run toward me when she's happy or sad or excited or scared. I want to be her soft place to land." Emma had fallen asleep again, her breathing slow and steady against my chest. Marcus reached up to stroke her tiny hand, and she immediately wrapped her fingers around his thumb, a reflex that never failed to make him smile with wonder. "Do you think they can really change?" I asked him quietly. "Or are we just seeing temporary improvement because they're scared of prison?" Marcus considered the question with the same careful analysis he brought to national security briefings. "I think fear was the catalyst, but shame has been the real teacher. They're confronting 35 years of damage they caused, and for the first time in their lives, they can't blame external circumstances or other people. That kind of forced self-reflection either breaks people completely or rebuilds them from the ground up." "And which do you think is happening with them?" "I think your mother is genuinely remorseful and desperate to earn forgiveness she knows she doesn't deserve. Your father is grappling with the realization that his leadership philosophy was fundamentally flawed. Both of them are doing the work, even when it's painful." Through the nursery window, I could see the first hints of dawn touching the horizon. In a few hours, Marcus would leave for another day of managing national security crises. I'd teach my morning art classes, then spend the afternoon with Emma before our family therapy session. "Marcus," I said suddenly, "do you ever regret marrying into such a complicated family?" He laughed softly. "Sarah, I run the FBI. I deal with international terrorists, organized crime syndicates, and congressional oversight committees. Your family drama is actually pretty manageable by comparison. Even the tax evasion and defense contractor fraud? Especially that. At least with your parents, the crimes were motivated by greed and poor judgment, rather than ideological extremism or genuine malice. White-collar criminals are usually easier to rehabilitate than true believers." Emma shifted in my arms, making the soft, sighing sounds that meant she was entering deep sleep. Soon I'd be able to transfer her to the crib without triggering the inevitable crying protest that came with interrupted naps. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," I said. "Not the kind where you pretend everything is fine, but the kind where you acknowledge the damage and choose to move forward anyway. What conclusion have you reached?" "That forgiveness isn't something you give to other people, it's something you give to yourself. I'm not forgiving my parents because they deserve it, or because they've earned it. I'm forgiving them because carrying 35 years of anger is exhausting, and I want Emma to grow up in a house filled with love instead of resentment. Marcus kissed my forehead gently. That's very wise, also very generous. Or very selfish, I said with a smile. I want my daughter to have grandparents who adore her, even if they're grandparents who had to learn how to love through federal supervision and mandatory therapy. As the sun rose over our quiet suburban neighborhood, I realized that the baby shower disaster that had seemed like the worst day of my life had actually been the beginning of something better. Not perfect. We'd never be a perfect family. But honestly, finally, real in ways we'd never been before. Emma slept peacefully in my arms, unaware that her very existence had been the catalyst for 3 generations of women learning how to break cycles instead of repeating them. And that, I thought as I finally transferred her to her crib without incident, might be the most important gift any of us could give her. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house, a larger place Marcus had insisted we needed, once Emma started crawling and treating every piece of furniture like a personal jungle gym, watching my mother teach my 15-month-old daughter how to finger paint. No, sweet pea, Mom said gently as Emma tried to eat the purple paint. Paint goes on the paper, not in your mouth. Like this, see? It was a surreal moment. The same woman who'd thrown away my childhood artwork was now patiently guiding tiny hands across paper, celebrating every chaotic smear and accidental masterpiece with genuine enthusiasm. The transformation hadn't been smooth or linear. There had been setbacks, arguments, and moments when I'd questioned whether putting ourselves through therapy was worth the emotional exhaustion. But watching Mom's face light up when Emma babbled gamma for the first time had convinced me we were on the right path. Sarah, Dad called from the living room, where he was assembling Emma's new bookshelf with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades managing military logistics. Do you want the children's books organized alphabetically or by reading level? Alphabetically is fine, Dad, I called back, still marveling at the fact that my father was voluntarily organizing children's literature. A year ago, he would have handed the project off to someone else and retreated to his study to watch military documentaries. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Dr. Reeves standing on our porch with a bottle of champagne and a satisfied smile. Congratulations, she said, stepping inside. Today marks exactly 1 year of consistent therapy participation. That's a significant milestone. It was also the end of our court-mandated sessions. The federal probation requirements included family therapy for 2 years. But after 12 months of weekly sessions, Dr. Reeves had recommended reducing frequency to monthly check-ins. How do you feel about the progress we've made? She asked, settling into our living room while Dad continued his book organization project and Mom helped Emma create what appeared to be an abstract expressionist interpretation of a rainbow. Like we're different people, I said honestly, not perfect people, but functional people, people who can disagree without destroying each other. The changes had been measurable. Mom had stopped making passive-aggressive comments about my weight, my career, or my parenting choices. Instead, she'd started asking questions, genuine questions about my art classes, my students, my hopes for Emma's future. Dad had learned to offer support without trying to solve every problem. And he'd developed an unexpected talent for making Emma laugh by making silly faces during diaper changes. Marcus appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, but with Emma's favorite stuffed elephant tucked under his arm, a security measure he'd implemented after she'd had a meltdown during his last conference call when Mr. Peanuts was nowhere to be found. Dr. Reeves, he said warmly, perfect timing. I just got off a call with the Attorney General about your research proposal. 6 months into our therapy journey, Dr. Reeves had asked permission to document our case study for a research paper on court-mandated family therapy outcomes. The Federal Probation Office had been interested in her preliminary findings, particularly the correlation between financial consequences and genuine behavioral change. What's the verdict? She asked. They want to fund a pilot program. 5-year study, multiple federal districts, comparing traditional probation with therapy-integrated sentences for white-collar family crimes. Your work with us is going to become a template for federal rehabilitation programs. Dr. Reeves looked genuinely surprised. That's incredible. Though I should mention that your family's success rate isn't typical. Most court-mandated therapy participants show improvement during the required period, then regress once supervision ends. What makes our situation different? I asked. Several factors. Sarah's willingness to set clear boundaries while still offering opportunities for change. Marcus's position provides real consequences for failure. But mostly, your parents' genuine recognition that their behavior patterns were destructive rather than protective. Emma chose that moment to abandon her painting project and crawl toward Marcus at impressive speed, leaving purple handprints across the hardwood floor. He scooped her up without hesitation, completely unbothered by the paint now decorating his expensive suit. "Dada," she announced proudly, smearing purple across his shirt. "That's right, princess. And you're an artist, just like Mama." Watching Marcus with Emma never failed to amaze me. The same man who testified before congressional committees and briefed the president on national security threats became completely undone by toddler giggles and first words. "Speaking of change," Bethany said, arriving through the back door with her arms full of grocery bags, "I have news." My sister had become an unexpected ally over the past year. The family therapy sessions had forced her to confront her own role in our dysfunctional dynamics, particularly her tendency to enable Mom's behavior by playing Switzerland in every conflict. "Good news or dramatic news?" I asked, helping her unload groceries. "Both. I'm pregnant." The kitchen erupted in congratulations and excited chaos. Mom immediately abandoned Emma's art project to hug Bethany, tears streaming down her face. Dad emerged from the living room to awkwardly pat Bethany's shoulder while muttering something about being blessed with granddaughters. But I noticed something different in how they reacted compared to my pregnancy announcement. There were no comments about timing, no suggestions about preparedness, no subtle implications that Bethany was making questionable choices. Just pure, uncomplicated joy. "How far along?" Mom asked. 12 weeks, due in December. Bethany's eyes met mine across the kitchen. "I wanted to tell you first because I want my pregnancy to be different from yours. I want us to celebrate each other instead of competing. I want our kids to grow up as friends, not rivals." Dr. Reeves observed this interaction with professional interest. "Bethany, that's a significant shift from the family dynamics we discussed in early sessions. What's changed in your perspective?" Watching Sarah navigate parenthood made me realize how much energy I wasted trying to be the good daughter by default, Bethany said. "I thought maintaining my position as the favorite child was more important than having a real relationship with my sister. But Emma changed that. Seeing how happy Sarah is, how good she is at motherhood, how much she deserved support instead of criticism, it made me ashamed of staying neutral all those years." Emma had escaped from Marcus and was now attempting to scale Dad's leg like a tiny mountaineer. He lifted her effortlessly, and she immediately began pulling on his glasses with the focused determination of someone conducting important scientific research. "Grandpa," she said clearly, and Dad's entire face transformed. "Did you hear that?" he asked, looking around the room as if Emma had just delivered the Gettysburg Address. She said, "Grandpa? That was definitely Grandpa." "Her vocabulary is expanding rapidly," Dr. Reeves noted. "Children who grow up in emotionally stable environments tend to reach language milestones earlier." It was a subtle but important observation. Emma was developing in an atmosphere of consistent love and security, something that had been missing from my own childhood and Bethany's, despite our material advantages. Marcus's phone buzzed with what I recognized as his urgent but not crisis-level ringtone. He glanced at the screen and sighed. "I need to take this, but it should be quick. Something about a congressional briefing that got moved up to tomorrow morning." As he stepped onto the patio to handle whatever federal emergency required his immediate attention, I realized how seamlessly we'd all adapted to his demanding career. A year ago, my parents had resented his frequent work calls and unpredictable schedule. Now they understood that national security didn't operate on family dinner timelines, and they'd learned to appreciate the moments when he was present rather than resenting the moments when duty called. "Sarah," Mom said suddenly, "I have something for you." She retrieved her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. "It's not a special occasion or anything. I saw it and thought of you." Inside was a silver picture frame, engraved with the words, "My daughter, my pride, my joy." The frame held a photo I'd never seen before, me at age 5, covered in finger paint, and grinning with pure happiness. "I found it when we were packing the house," Mom explained quietly. "It was in a box of photos I'd hidden away because they reminded me of how much I'd failed you. But Dr. Reeves helped me understand that hiding from my mistakes doesn't erase them, it just prevents me from learning from them." I stared at the photo, remembering that day vaguely. I'd been helping Mom paint the garden shed, and had gotten more paint on myself than on the building. In the picture, Mom was laughing too, her arm around my paint-covered shoulders. "I want Emma to see this picture and know that her mama was loved, even when I was too broken to show it properly," Mom continued. "I want her to know that sometimes people have to learn how to love, but that doesn't mean the love wasn't always there." Dr. Reeves pulled out a small notebook and jotted something down. "Mrs. Henderson, that's exactly the kind of reframing that indicates genuine emotional growth. You're taking responsibility for your failures while also acknowledging the underlying feelings that were always present." Emma, apparently bored with Dad's glasses, had moved on to exploring the contents of Dr. Reeves's purse. She'd discovered a small stress ball and was squeezing it with the intense concentration of someone discovering the secrets of the universe. "Baby scientist," Bethany observed fondly. "She's going to be trouble." "The best kind of trouble," I said, watching my daughter investigate her world with fearless curiosity. Marcus returned from his call looking slightly grim. "I have to fly to Denver tomorrow morning. There's been a development in a case that requires on-site supervision." "How long?" I asked. "Probably 3 days, maybe 4. But Sarah, this one's different. It's related to the TechFlow investigation." The room went quiet. Dad's face went pale, and Mom unconsciously reached for his hand. "What kind of development?" Dad asked carefully. Marcus glanced at Dr. Reeves, who nodded encouragingly. We'd reached a point in our family therapy where transparency was valued over protection. TechFlow's CEO took a plea deal 6 months ago. He's been providing information about other defense contractors involved in similar schemes. Your case helped establish the template for how these investigations proceed, but now we're looking at a network of companies and retired military personnel across 12 states. Are Robert and I going to be called as witnesses?" Mom asked. "Possibly. The prosecutors are still building their cases, but your cooperation has been noted favorably. If you're called to testify, it would likely be to describe how the recruitment and payment systems worked." Dad straightened his shoulders, his military bearing reasserting itself. "We'll do whatever is necessary to help with the investigation." It was a far cry from the desperate, terrified man who'd begged for mercy a year ago. The combination of consequences, therapy, and genuine remorse had transformed him into someone capable of accepting responsibility and facing the future with dignity. "The timing is actually good," Dr. Reeves said. "This will be our final group session, but having a real-world test of your new family dynamics will help determine whether the changes are sustainable under stress." Quote, Emma had abandoned the stress ball and was now pulling books off Dad's newly organized shelf with systematic efficiency. Instead of stopping her, he sat down on the floor and began reading the titles aloud, turning her destructive impulse into an impromptu literacy lesson. Brown Bear, what do you see?" he read in the dramatic voice he'd developed specifically for story time. "I see Emma looking at me." She clapped delightedly and reached for another book, completely unaware that her grandfather was demonstrating a level of patience and playfulness that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. As I watched my family, imperfect, complicated, but genuinely loving, I realized that sometimes the best thing that can happen to broken people is being forced to face the consequences of their brokenness. And sometimes, if they're very lucky, they get the chance to build something better from the pieces. 2 years after the baby shower that changed everything, I found myself standing in a federal courthouse in Denver, watching my father take the witness stand in the largest defense contractor fraud case in a decade. Emma, now a chatty 3-year-old with an opinion about everything, sat quietly in my lap, fascinated by the formal atmosphere and the important-looking people in suits. Marcus sat 3 rows behind us in the gallery, no longer just an observer but the lead federal official who'd helped build the case that had sprawled into a multi-state investigation involving 47 companies and over 200 individuals. What had started as my parents' financial crimes had become the thread that unraveled an entire network of corruption. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Colonel Robert James Henderson, United States Army, retired." Dad's voice was steady, his military bearing intact despite the circumstances. He'd been preparing for this moment for 6 months, working with federal prosecutors to provide detailed testimony about how TechFlow Solutions had recruited retired military personnel and facilitated the payment schemes that had defrauded the government of over $80 million. "Colonel Henderson, can you describe your initial contact with TechFlow Solutions?" Dad launched into his testimony with the precision of someone who'd spent years briefing superior officers. He detailed the recruitment lunch, the gradual escalation of consulting fees, the deliberate obscuring of payment sources. But unlike the desperate, defensive man who'd sat in our living room 2 years ago, this version of my father owned every mistake completely. "At what point did you realize the arrangement was improper?" the prosecutor asked. "I should have realized it immediately," Dad said firmly. "I was a career military officer. I understood the regulations regarding post-service employment and conflicts of interest. I chose to ignore those regulations because the money was substantial, and I convinced myself that my advice was genuinely valuable." Emma whispered loudly, "Grandpa sounds important," and several jurors smiled despite the serious nature of the proceedings. In the months leading up to this trial, our family had faced the most intense scrutiny imaginable. FBI agents had interviewed every family member multiple times. Financial records going back 15 years had been subpoenaed and examined. Media attention had forced Marcus to install additional security at our house and arrange for Emma to attend a private preschool with enhanced protection protocols. But through it all, the foundation we'd built in therapy held firm. My parents never wavered in their cooperation, never attempted to minimize their culpability, never asked us to lie or obstruct justice to protect them. They'd committed to complete honesty, and they'd maintained that commitment even when it meant facing potential humiliation on national television. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal. He painted Dad as a naive retiree taken advantage of by sophisticated corporate criminals, suggesting that his military background made him unsuited to understand complex financial arrangements. Dad rejected every attempt to minimize his responsibility. "Sir, I was a colonel in the United States Army. I managed multi-million-dollar budgets and supervised hundreds of personnel. I was not naive, and I was not confused. I was greedy, and I made choices that violated both federal law and the honor code I'd sworn to uphold for 25 years. The courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorney seemed taken aback by Dad's complete refusal to accept any excuse for his actions. During the lunch recess, we gathered in a small conference room where Mom had been waiting with Bethany and her new baby, 6-month-old Michael. The contrast between our two family crises was stark. Emma's birth had been surrounded by chaos and dysfunction, while Michael's arrival had been celebrated with pure joy and excitement. "How do you think it's going?" Mom asked nervously. Marcus, who'd been monitoring the proceedings from his unique perspective as both a family member and the federal official overseeing the investigation, was frank in his assessment. "Robert's testimony is exactly what the prosecutors needed. He's credible, detailed, and completely unrehearsed. The jury is listening to someone who clearly understands the magnitude of what he did wrong." "What happens next?" Bethany asked, bouncing Michael gently as he fussed about missing his nap. "Sentencing is scheduled for next month," Marcus said. "Given the cooperation level, the restitution payments, and the character references, we're looking at probably 18 months federal time, followed by extended probation." Mom's face crumpled slightly, but she didn't protest or ask for special consideration. 2 years of therapy and consequence had taught her that some actions simply required payment in full. "Will the girls be able to visit him?" she asked quietly. "Federal minimum security facilities have family visitation programs," Marcus confirmed. Emma will be able to see her grandfather regularly, though obviously the circumstances will require some age-appropriate explanations. Emma, who'd been coloring in a book of federal building sketches that one of Marcus's agents had given her, looked up with interest. "Are we going to see Grandpa's new house?" The innocence of the question hit everyone differently. To Emma, this was just another adult arrangement she didn't fully understand. Like Marcus's work trips or the security guards who sometimes accompanied us to the grocery store. "Something like that, sweetheart," I said carefully. The afternoon session focused on the broader conspiracy, with Dad providing details about meetings he'd attended, other retired officers he'd been introduced to, and the systematic way TechFlow had built its network of influence. His military precision made him an excellent witness. He remembered dates, times, locations, and conversation details with remarkable accuracy. But the most powerful moment came during the redirect examination, when the prosecutor asked a final question. "Colonel Henderson, what would you tell other retired military personnel who might be approached with similar opportunities?" Quote. Dad looked directly at the jury, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades leading soldiers in life and death situations. "I would tell them that honor doesn't have an expiration date, the oath you take as an officer doesn't become void when you retire. And I would tell them that 30 pieces of silver always cost more than you think you're paying." The biblical reference wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Dad was comparing himself to Judas, the ultimate symbol of betrayal for personal gain. When court adjourned for the day, we walked out of the federal building into the bright Colorado sunshine. Media crews were waiting, but Marcus's security detail efficiently guided us to our vehicles without allowing any questions or photographs that might compromise Emma's privacy. That evening, we gathered in our hotel suite for what would likely be our last family dinner before Dad began his federal sentence. Mom had insisted on cooking, somehow managing to create a full meal using only the suite's kitchenette, and her determination to maintain some normalcy for the children. "I have something to say," Dad announced as we finished dessert. Emma was building towers with her blocks while Michael slept peacefully in Bethany's arms. "When this all started, I thought the worst thing that could happen was going to prison. I thought losing our house and our savings and our reputation was the ultimate consequence." He paused, watching Emma knock down her tower and immediately begin rebuilding it. "But I was wrong. The worst thing that could have happened was losing all of you. And for 35 years, that's exactly what I was doing. Losing my daughters one cruel comment at a time, one missed opportunity at a time, one moment of selfishness at a time." Mom reached for his hand across the table. "We both were. So I want to thank you," Dad continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "All of you. Sarah, for giving us consequences that forced us to change. Marcus, for providing those consequences while still offering us a path forward. Bethany, for refusing to let us divide our family anymore. Dr. Reeves, for teaching us how to be better people. And Emma and Michael, for giving us reasons to deserve the second chance we've been given." Emma looked up from her blocks, apparently sensing the emotional weight of the moment. She walked over to Dad and climbed into his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "I love you, Grandpa," she said simply. "I love you too, Princess, more than you'll ever know." 3 weeks later, Dad reported to a federal minimum security facility in southern Colorado to begin his sentence. The night before he left, he and Emma had a tea party in our backyard, complete with her plastic tea set and cookies that Mom had baked specially for the occasion. "When you come home," Emma told him seriously, "we'll have another tea party, okay?" "It's a date," he promised. Mom moved into a small apartment near the prison so she could visit regularly. She got a job at a local elementary school, working as a teacher's aide and discovering that she had a natural talent for helping struggling students. Her supervisor didn't know about her husband's situation, but she often commented on Mom's patience and empathy with children who had difficult home lives. "It's like she understands what it feels like to be disappointed in yourself," the principal told me during a parent conference for Emma, who'd started attending the same school district. "She has a gift for helping kids believe they can be better than their circumstances." Bethany and I developed the kind of sisterly relationship we'd never had as children. Our kids became best friends, playing together while we figured out how to be mothers and daughters and sisters all at the same time. We started a tradition of monthly dinners, where we practiced the family dynamics we'd learned in therapy, building new patterns to replace the destructive ones we'd inherited. Marcus's career continued to flourish, though he'd made it clear to his superiors that his family came first. When the Attorney General offered him a promotion that would have required extensive travel, he declined without hesitation. "I spent the first 40 years of my life building a career," he told me. "I want to spend the next 40 building a family." 1 year into Dad's sentence, Dr. Reeves published her research paper on court-mandated family therapy outcomes. Our case study had become the centerpiece of a federal program now operating in 23 districts, with preliminary results suggesting that therapeutic interventions were significantly more effective than traditional punitive measures for certain types of family-related crimes. "Your family's willingness to do the hard work of change has literally influenced federal policy," she told us during a follow-up interview. "The Henderson model is being studied by criminologists and family therapists across the country." But the most meaningful measure of our progress came from Emma herself. At 4 years old, she was confident, curious, and secure in ways that I'd never been as a child. She expected adults to listen to her, to treat her opinions with respect, to celebrate her achievements and comfort her disappointments. "Mama," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, "why does Grandpa live at his workplace?" I'd been dreading this question, but Dr. Reeves had helped us prepare age-appropriate explanations. "Grandpa made some mistakes before you were born," I said carefully. "When grown-ups make big mistakes, sometimes they have to go to a special place to think about how to be better. Like a timeout, but longer." "Is he learning to be nicer?" "Yes, sweetheart. He's learning to be the best grandpa he can be for you." "Good," she said matter-of-factly. "I like nice grandpa better than mean grandpa." The simplicity of her assessment was profound. In Emma's world, people could change, mistakes could be fixed, and love was always possible, even after serious failures. 2.5 years after the baby shower that had shattered my family, we were something entirely new. Not perfect, not without scars, but honest and loving and real in ways we'd never managed before. Dad would be released in 6 months, returning to a family that had learned how to forgive without forgetting, how to love without enabling, how to support without excusing. Emma was already planning his homecoming tea party, complete with handmade decorations and a cake she insisted on helping to bake. She had no memory of the cruel people her grandparents had once been. She only knew the loving, patient, genuinely remorseful people they'd chosen to become. And sometimes I thought as I watched her sleep peacefully in her yellow-walled nursery, that's exactly how healing should work. Not by erasing the past, but by building a future so beautiful that it makes the journey worthwhile. Marcus found me standing in the doorway, watching our daughter dream whatever dreams 4-year-olds have. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, thinking about the question. About the baby shower? About the investigation? About forcing them into therapy? About any of it? "No," I said firmly, "none of it. Even the awful parts led us here, and here is exactly where we're supposed to be." Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like tea party before settling back into peaceful silence. Outside, the security detail maintained their quiet watch over our suburban home, protecting a family that had learned the difference between privacy and secrecy, between loyalty and enabling, between forgiveness and forgetting. We weren't the family we'd started as, but we were exactly the family we'd chosen to become. And that, I realized as Marcus kissed the top of my head and we headed to our own bed, was the most beautiful ending I could have imagined. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.